Let's talk about Kuzenbo, King of Kappa. When it comes to the opinions on the current state of Kuzenbo, there's a variety of them. Originally, a lot of people actually thought that he was gonna be OP, mainly because of the fact that he can reflect damage in combination with thorns and so on and so on. But most people actually realized that the best way to counter reflect is simply not attacking the god. Since then, opinions have shifted a little bit. Especially in the pro player scene, there are quite a few people who think that he is complete trash and doesn't really have a place in the meta. This video will be my take on where I see him, where I see potential problems with him, and how you can maybe make him work for you, and also maybe where to play him. For that, let's first of all look at his kit. His passive is Water Bowl. It's up to a 10% damage reduction. This was nerfed from the PTS version, and this stacks with the amount of hits you take, or the amount of damage you take rather, and it's quite strong in my opinion. Damage mitigation is something that is often very underrated in Smite. Many people don't realize how much that means for Cyrus, for example, as well. And it just does a lot for you. When you tank a tower with Kuzenbo, you will notice how much of a difference it makes to have all this damage mitigation, especially if you took some damage before. The amount of damage that actually goes through to you is quite significantly lowered, and if you consider that you can also get other items like Spirit Rope to amplify this effect, then you can have some very interesting interactions in how much less damage you will take, especially in combination with protections on top of that. So I think the passive, while not the greatest passive of all, is pretty solid. It is a support passive that allows you to frontline, as long as you're somehow able to soak up some damage for it to activate, and that I think is a good part of his kit. The next one is Nene Kappa. Nene Kappa has, well, okay damage. It's not like an instant clear, but it has solid damage. The damage goes up quite significantly when you bounce the Kappa, and it makes for a decent wave clear. It's not the greatest wave clear, it's not the worst wave clear, and that's pretty much where it stands. Unlike Hou Yi, there is no additional benefit from bouncing more. You can hit a target multiple times, so it's not bad to bounce, but it's not like the damage is somehow amplified or there are any additional effects. After that, you have that mini Kappa which comes out and, yeah, does a little bit more damage. This can actually be used to block attacks, which is something that many people don't seem to notice. The Nene Kappa can soak up basics, and if you place it properly, then it will do just that, and it will do pretty good at it, so nothing that you should underestimate. At the same time, this is basically the only supportive function that this ability brings you. There's no CC on it, there's not even a slow, there's nothing in that regard. It's just damage and a little more damage and some sort of strange body block. The next ability is Shell Spikes, a damage reflect that goes up from 20 to 40% depending on how much you leveled the ability. That it also reduces the cooldown of your Nene Kappa by a little bit. It goes up to 0.6 seconds per tick of damage that you take, but realistically it's not very much. When you think about it, it means that if you get 10 hits on you within the 3 seconds that Shell Spikes last, then you will have 6 seconds reduction on your 1, and your 1 is not the most relevant ability in teamfights or anything like that anyways. And for you to take 10 hits in that time, you basically have to be in a teamfight or you have to be soaking up a full dot, because otherwise enemies can just be smart enough not to attack you. Third ability is Sumo Slam. Sumo Slam is, well, quite straightforward. It's a pin, a push and a pin basically. It does some damage, and that's all it really does if you boil it down to the very essence of the ability. It's interesting because it pushes enemies away, different from what other supports do, being pulling them towards you with, for example, a taunt or locking them down with a stun. So it has a very unique playstyle of being used and kind of forces you into blink if you want to have some sort of support potential in order to set up your own 3. Keep in mind here that your 3 is a relatively low cooldown ability, it's not an ultimate, whereas Blink has a very long cooldown, so you will not be able to set up your 3 that way all that often, and you will often have to try and position yourself somewhere around the enemy, like you have to walk behind them or something like that in order to get good positioning for your 3. The ultimate is basically a huge AoE zoning tool with some extra movement speed and CC immunity for Kuzenbo at the same time. Now his ultimate once again knocks enemies back, away from you in very small bumps, and as such is not ideal to set up for your allies unless you are behind the enemies. And this is where we can talk about the kit as a whole. A word that I've recently used in the context of Morrigan is kit synergy, and when you look at Morrigan, there's still a fair bit of it. When you look at Kuzenbo, it's gonna be very complicated. Kuzenbo's kit has a lot of gimmicks. He's one of the few gods in the game that can push, and his push is continuous. It's not a knock-up or anything in there, it's just a straightforward push. He is a god that has a minion that spawns after a line clear ability, and there is an ultimate that's, well, pretty much a bit of everything. It's a mobile somewhat between Hades, Hunbats, also Sylvanas ult. Somewhere in there. It's just not really something that you can put a finger on because it is so many things at once. And then there's the Reflect, which is very interesting as a mechanic as well. The problem is that all of these mechanics don't really seem to find a real synergy. There is some synergy between his 3 and his 4, because you can use your Sumo Slam in order to dash past the enemies, which means you will not use the actual effect of the 3, and then use your ultimate from behind them, but that's already not really ideal. What you want to do, ideally, is walk up to an enemy so they're on the same level as you, on the same height, have some sort of wall near you, and then just push them sideways into the wall to body block them after, and that way set off your teammates. If you can do this properly, it will lead to a lot of lockdown, more than any CC could provide you with, really, because you can body block with another player so well if you push someone into a wall. But that's just an ideal scenario. Then Shell Spikes. Shell Spikes is just so cool, but so out of place at the same time. If you want a Reflect ability, then it would make sense to have some sort of way of forcing an enemy to attack you. And the only one, once again, that Kuzenbo has is that pin. And if you're pinned, then your main goal is gonna be getting out and not damaging Kuzenbo, because he's probably gonna be very tanky and you won't be able to kill him anyways. So why would you attack him there? What a Reflect ability would make sense with is a taunt. You would have a taunt and the Reflect, so you taunt them and then you use the Reflect so they hurt themselves while attacking you, while being forced to attack you. Like this, you can always hope for situations like a Kraken coming up under you, or an Isis ult where you can walk into to turn on the Reflect, but overall it has a lot less uses than you would think at first. A smart player will just stop attacking you the moment you use the spikes most of the time, unless they have so much damage and so much tankiness that they know they can just eat through you no matter the Reflect, which happens often enough as well. Sometimes you can just slap down the enemy Kuzenbo and he can't really do anything about it. At the same time, you can't just slap a taunt onto Kuzenbo in his current state. He already has a pin, he already has a knockback, he has good CC, which is really hard to apply. You can't really give him more mobility because he's already relatively mobile for a Guardian as well, so you can't give him more in that regard, which kind of leads to the conclusion that the Blink will probably just stay on him. It'll probably just be a standard on this god, same as Blink is a standard on Gap, and that's just something we accept, something that you use in most situations. You can get away without, but it's drastically going to hinder your setup potential, and that's something, well, you have to decide game per game. But where does that leave him? He's not really an aggressive solo laner. His clear in solo is not the greatest. He can do that, but you're not gonna bully out someone in lane like, for example, a Hercules would. So that's not an ideal position for him. You can play him as a jungler with the one you can actually clear decently, but really you're not gonna have the same impact, and it requires a very specific team comp to put a medium damage Guardian into the jungle. There are exceptions like Athena and Ymir, but they usually have more direct damage that they can use quite frequently, and well, they have an easier time to confirm as well. So we could put him into mid, but really at the moment with the meta and how it's shaping, you want to have a high damage guard in mid that can clear very early on, and he just doesn't offer that. In a support role, his kit is just not that supportive. He can be played there, but same as solo, there are others who basically get the job done better. If you want to play Kuzenbo in support, then that means that you will have to have a secondary frontliner in solo lane, somebody who can set up for you, because Kuzenbo can just not reliably always set up. It's a very conditional setup that he has. So no matter where you put him, he's always gonna have a major downside over other characters. I mostly see him in solo or support in the end anyways. I think those are the roles that he can make use of, or he can be made use of, but still neither of these roles seem to be perfectly fitting for him at the moment. And this is something that could maybe be looked at. I think that, for example, by adding a small slow on the Nene Kappa, you would not break the god. This would lead to the same situation in solo. He would not be able to clear any better, and he needs to use his 1 to clear, so he can't use that for aggression. And in the duo lane, it would lead to the same thing. You either help clearing or you try to set up with a slow, but that's okay because this is really the only setup you have. A slow would also allow you to set yourself up better because you would be able to, well, walk up to an enemy easier and use your sumo slam without them just walking away from you, because that's exactly what I would do. If a Kuzenbo comes up to me, I just walk away. I'm not gonna burst him. I know he's gonna deal damage to me and it's gonna reflect stuff, so I don't want that. He's gonna try and lock me down, so I don't want that, so I just walk away. And there's so little he can do to prevent that as long as he doesn't have blink or maybe sprint. And if he had a slow, then you would have a mechanic that would prevent you from just walking away and ignoring him. And I think that's exactly what he needs. He doesn't need a taunt because that would be way too much. He doesn't even need more mobility, but he needs something that forces the enemy to not just ignore him. And I think that would really be something that changes him in multiple roles as well. He would be a better solo and a better support likewise, because it would just have more of a role late game in that regard. And it would also allow for more, well, planned plays than what we have at the moment. More actual setup plays instead of trying for cheesy reflect damage stuff, which I think should not be what the character should be about. I think it's a nice benefit to have that in the kit, but it's not what his kit revolves around with the interesting push mechanic that he has. So I'm really hoping that his kit will be directed more towards somewhat of a bit of a lockdown guard, and I think then he would be in a very good place, which he can currently not really fulfill with what he has so far. That is my current take on Kuzenbo. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't subbed yet, feel free to do so, and feel free to click that bell to get notified of new videos. See you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.